Because think about it. If you are going sideways and dropping hints and trying to get what you want without having to actually ask for what you want, there can sometimes be a manipulative aspect of it. Like if you say, use criticism, if you use criticism instead of using a direct request. So that example of, I want my partner to spend more time with their family, but you say, use a critical comment like, oh, so I guess you're going to hang with your best friend again, or you're going to go play golf for 4 hours again. It's an observation, but there's a tone of criticism. It's meant to evoke guilt. It's meant to evoke guilt, and it's using emotional manipulation to get them to read your mind and infer that you're not happy, you want something else, not address what it is, but just do the thing. That's all manipulation. That's not respectful. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina, Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Lynskey, a leadership and self-trust coach.
So today we are continuing our series on understanding aspects of human behavior that's rooted in the hidden quadrant of the Johari window. And if this is your first time on our channel, folks, we've been working with this model and using it as a tool for self-awareness and self-understanding. And there are 4 quadrants, and it's combinations of what's known to ourselves and not known to ourselves, and what's known to others and not known to others. It ends up with an open quadrant where it's known to self, known to others, a blind quadrant, which is known to others but not known to ourselves. There's an unknown, the unconscious, which is not known to self, not known to others. But we've been exploring the hidden, which is known to self, but not known to others. And the reason why we've been emphasizing the hidden quadrant is because it is generally the origins and the roots of a lot of interpersonal conflict and miscommunication. In some ways, there's reasons to keep things private, but other times there's fear, there's insecurity, there's cultural patterns, there's different reasons why things are known to ourselves that we are not sharing and bringing into the open. And when that becomes problematic, that's a time to look and question and bring some curiosity of if that's serving us. And so today we are going to be focusing on a very specific aspect in the hidden that I'm calling hidden requests. And I'm not sure, and Karen, you can tell me as a more, actually, you're neurodivergent too, so we don't have a neurotypical person here to answer this question. But for neurodivergence, especially if you're on autistic spectrum, this is a really challenging behavior because I know for myself, I tend to be really direct, and I can't speak for all people on the spectrum because many have learned masking. So many have learned this habit of keeping things hidden. But for those who haven't and don't engage in much masking, we almost have the opposite. Like we don't know what should not be in the open. So it's really challenging for me, though, with neurotypicals who use this way of communication of hidden requests and indirect communication. Super challenging for me because, one, I don't even pick up that there's a hidden request. And if I do, I have to decipher it. And I always tell people, if what you say isn't what you mean, then in my brain, there's infinite possibilities of what you actually mean. And so then it ends up being this exhausting guessing game. So we are going to go into the whys, the how, some of the reasons why there's this hidden area, how it can create problems. So we're going to be focusing more on the challenges, and then some pragmatic steps on what can we do if we want to be more aware and this has been a problem in our lives, and how do we bring that more out into the open.
So before we start, don't forget, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications, because as you know, that was a way for you to know when our next episode is going to be posted. So it's interesting what you're talking about, because I realize as a leadership and self trust coach, one of the things I do is work with leadership teams and leaders to be able to create more cohesive and bolder actions.
Mm.
And a big part of that is teaching the leaders the importance of what we're just talking about, to be able to help them learn to make specific requests, because it's so easy for us to just be in our own language. And
Mm.
we think we're saying what we really need to say and telling them what the next action is, but we typically don't. And I think we didn't realize that when we don't, we're actually not allowing ourselves to create that intentional connections that allows us to build the trust between me and another person. Because so many often we have miscommunications and I get frustrated. Oh my gosh, what's his problem? Or what's my problem? Like, it's about getting on the same page, but I'm not on the same page because I'm using language that doesn't help us get on the same page. And so this is a really important skill that helps me work with leadership teams or even individual leaders, because the more specific requests they are, the deeper trust they have with one another, because I'm not disappointing the other person, or I can really make sure that I give him what he wants instead of I have to do the rework or you have to redo the rework.
I like that frame that you used about, kind of you connected the dots between when we're more direct, we also have more intentional connection. We'll keep going forward, but keep that frame in mind, because we're going to go over a lot of the reasons that people avoid directness, and it's generally fear-based. So if you have Karen's really positive frame of creating intentional connections, maybe that can be helpful. I tell you, as someone on the spectrum, I thank you for the work that you're doing. You're encouraging people to be more clear and direct. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
let's go into
that's
some of the reasons why there's indirect communication.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so we are not saying that indirect is necessarily inherently bad. And in fact, there's a lot of cultures where it is actually preferred and it's seen as being polite or a form of respect. I've worked with clients who are from Japan or grew up in Japanese, more Japanese American culture, and it's considered to be rude to just, be direct. It's considered to be harsh and impolite. And then one of my classmates was from England, and we used to have these conversations because I would really struggle. And she thought I was very rude. She's British, and she was not used to someone like me who was really direct. And she had a much more understated way of communicating. And, we had to work through that cultural difference through school because I had trouble understanding what it was she actually wanted. And then she just thought I was a bull in a china shop. So, and then even here, there are regions in the United States, like the South, there's often some aspects of the culture where it's a little less direct. I have found that California, particularly Northern California, much more indirect versus, say, New Jersey or I was in the Washington, D.C. area. I have friends from New York. My best friend's from New Jersey. Much more direct culture. So it's not like good or bad. It's different in and of itself. It's more about understanding why we're doing it and then being intentional of observing, is this being diplomatic, which is my intention, or am I creating confusion? And maybe I need to be more direct. So bringing that intentionality. Okay, but here's a challenge. Relying on indirect communication is very dependent upon the other person inferring what we're really thinking. So let me just give you a super simple example. This is someone I dated once, and he would, around 5:30, he'd walk into the kitchen and I'd be working on something, doing homework, and he'd just say, I was starting to think about dinner. I'd be like, thanks for sharing. The request was, hey, I'm hungry. Like, can you start dinner? But rather than making that request, which would have been more direct because I did the cooking, it's not like some assumption it's me. It's just he knew I love to cook, but I got distracted with my schoolwork. But instead of just saying that, he would make this just a statement of his, to me, a statement of his thought process. I was thinking about dinner. Okay, well, what were you thinking about? So that's just an example of pretty benign, but of a hidden request. The problem is when he's now depending on me, on hearing that information and then making inferences and concluding what he actually meant. There's so much room for conflict and miscommunication because, like I said, for me, it could be an infinite number of possibilities. So, we've explored in the past podcast about communication and what gets in the way of clear communication, and we'll put a link below. But we used a model called the ladder of inference. And a lot of what we talked about was all the different ways relying on inference gets in trouble. But that was more about when we infer, when we're the ones jumping up the ladder. And what I want people to understand is this form of indirect communication is actually reinforcing the behavior for someone else to jump up the ladder, to make inferences, to use this method that is often inaccurate and incorrect. So this is why we want to tie all of this together so it brings more awareness. There's an unconsciousness. It's become a habit of being indirect. So even when it's not necessary, there's not a need for diplomacy, there's still this indirect communication. And now it opens up the whole potential Pandora's box of miscommunication and problems.
And conflict, right? So you were just talking about cultural impacts, right? And I remember growing up in my Chinese American culture, I learned that actually indirect communication was our way of showing respect and making sure that we're cultivating harmony, because that's what we were talking about with saving face. And I remember that when I would accept work deliverables that were close enough, and rather than I would specifically tell them exactly what I needed or enough so they could better understand what I was looking for, because I didn't tell them what I needed and it was close enough, I had to spend so many hours reworking it. And it was all because I wasn't being direct. And the pattern continued until I realized that being direct isn't rude. I used to think it was like really rude. It was actually showing respect for everyone's time, mine and theirs, and enabling true collaboration. And so because of this, this experience itself has shaped a key element in some of my coaching, where especially with leaders who struggle with some of that cultural dynamics, because we all have that flavor of our cultural dynamics in it that creates our habits. So that way, when I share this story and I share this about being direct, it helps them find their true voice in making clear requests, right? Because there's no guilt associated with it, right? It's like sharing their point of view or their needs, and that is good. That is actually creating more harmony because we're both on the same page.
Yeah, I totally agree with this whole problem of disharmony. This is back in college before I knew about being on the spectrum and how my brain works and how it's really concrete. But I remember I would get in trouble with my best friend. First of all, this is another thing I didn't understand, shopping as a recreational activity. Okay, I didn't understand that. I'm very if you're shopping it's because you need something, you go get it and then you leave. But it was this social thing, and she would be browsing and hold something up and she would say, "Hey, doesn't this look cute?" And I would hear a question that I thought was direct, asking my opinion of something, and I would give my opinion. If I didn't like it, I would be like, I don't really like it. Well, after the third time, she got really mad and said, "You're no fun to go shopping with." And I didn't understand because I was like, "Well, I don't understand. Why do you ask me my opinion? I mean, if you like it." Because I think what she was really, her request was basically to validate her own taste or validate that she likes something, and to maybe suggest that she try it on or something, or run with or go with it. She was just looking for some sort of validation and requesting validation from me. But she didn't say something that would be more direct, like, "Hey, I really like this. Do you think I should try it on? What do you think about me trying it on?" That's a completely different request. And I would be like, "Sure, if you want to try it on, try it on." And I think that would have met her social need. But she kept asking me if I thought something was cute. And it's like, we have different styles. And I'd be like, truthful, no. But it created conflict. because of this indirectness. And I didn't even really understand why we had the conflict. So you can see how these differences,
Yeah.
there's no malicious intention at all on either side, but the differences, they create these challenges.
Yeah. And I would have just known that social cue that you don't picked up because you're autism, right? And I'd be like, try it on. I would get it. I would get it that because I would be doing the same way. So
You'd
I
be
would always be saying,
inferring. You would be
I'd be
inferring,
inferring and I'd
right?
be right on, right? Because I know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild.
So, let's just talk about the psychology behind these hidden requests.
Well, okay, so again, let's give another quickie example. Why do we say something like, "Oh, it's getting cold in here," instead of just saying, "Hey, it's getting cold, can you please close the window?" Like, it's this hint dropping. There's this tendency to drop hints that's supposed to be enough for the person to infer what it is that you are really needing or wanting, what the hidden request is, and then acting on the hidden request as if it was explicitly said. Why do we do this? So the most significant driver, and we've talked about this in past, it's generally the driver of indirectness in all types of behavior is conflict avoidance. So many of us have been conditioned to believe that direct requests, like you said, Karen, with Chinese culture, is somehow impolite. And I think for women, I think girls, we learn this, that being direct or making direct requests is demanding or bossy or pushy, all of these negative attributions. And
Bitchy.
so then that,
It's like use the big B word, bitchy. That's what I sorry.
yeah, by just being direct. So it triggers that fear of rejection or worry
Yes.
about seeming pushy. And then also sometimes it could be your past experiences might have taught you that being direct, like for me, right? I got in trouble a lot for being direct in
Mhm.
a broader culture that valued this indirectness as being polite. And I love what you said earlier, Karen, of saying that you saw that being direct was actually respectful of your time and other people's time, because when your requests were actually clear requests of what you wanted, then that time spent is getting accomplished what is actually desired, versus being indirect and then hoping they infer and they get close enough. But now there's like they just spent time doing something that wasn't really what you wanted, and now you're spending time fixing it. It's an interesting way to say, oh, it's respectful to be indirect, but for you to frame it as, but is it? Are there aspects of respect, like respecting someone's time? That's a different way that we can look at it. With being someone on the spectrum, I can share from my experience that it is a huge cognitive load to have to try to do all this deciphering, especially when you don't have the Rosetta Stone to decipher what all these clues mean. It really is a huge cognitive demand, but there's other areas where it can be problematic. And as a therapist, I work a lot with couples. And what I find is that people maybe feel like it's easier to be indirect, to rely on inference. If I'm being indirect and relying on someone else to refer, I'm literally looking for the other person to put in the cognitive work. They have to decipher what I mean. So now the burden is really on the listener, on the receiver. And for me, I feel like, well, it's just easier if I just say this sideways comment and they do all the work, it's easier for me. But actually, it's exhausting, like I said. And I have seen, I'm going to be a little bit broad brush, but like I said, culturally, and probably there's some aspect of evolution where women can be more indirect. There's a lot more social norms around us being polite, where there's a lot more flexibilities with males on being direct. But if you have a couple, you have those two, directness and indirectness. What I see a lot as a therapist is that miscommunication, where maybe the request is, I would really love you to spend more time with the family. But the indirect comment, maybe it's a criticism with sarcasm, like, oh, so it looks like you're going to spend the day with your friends. Like the partner is supposed to now make an inference. oh, my partner is unhappy about my decision and she really wants me to do something different than that. And now I have to figure out what the different thing is. Is it time with her? Was there something she wanted me to do? Is it time with the well, you have to kind of guess. And then there can be all of this frustration. And I've even seen it with lesbian couples. If there's indirectness, I'm just like, I don't know how you are communicating anything. Like one of you's got to be more direct. So when we have partners and we have teams, this different comfort level with the ability to just make requests clear and direct, or a communication style of relying on inference, that could really be a cost of this hidden style of communication.
So when I look at the professional settings, a lot about the hidden request, it's particularly problematic because when I think about a team member saying, we have a lot on our plates to do right now, instead of requesting from the manager, actually, we need so more resources because we're just highly burdened right now. I mean, I cannot ask my team to do any more, like literally. We need to get temporary or whatever. And that's being more specific because they're going to say, well, of course, we all have a lot on our plates, right? That's like the answer where they go. So why are you so special? That would have been like a more like direct way of saying, this is what I really need, right? I cannot ask. They're already doing more, and this will fall through if we don't do this. Like literally, we have to pick and choose. Like, so it's not that easy. So know that. So you know what? I've even noticed, how often an employee really wants a raise, but for some reason, asking for a raise feels so uncomfortable. I mean, I remember when I couldn't even negotiate what my salary would be when I'm a new employee. So imagine how I would do with asking a raise. So you would say things like, I've been here for 3 years now, been working really hard, hoping that they would say something else. And then rather you just ask
You're dropping
for the,
hints.
instead of like, asking for the promotion or even a raise. Or a manager would say something like, some people have been coming in later recently. And instead of addressing the absentee person directly, or would have said, guys, we gotta be here on time because this is where our customers come in and this is what's really important. And so we kind of beat around the bush instead of directly saying about the absentee. So interesting about in the work environment that we want to be nice, right? And that's what happens a lot in the professional setting because we think, they'll get it. If I say that, they'll get it. But so many answers to it, like you said, so that's part of the problem. So I think that, in the end, these indirect communications are leading to delayed problem resolution, right? And how often is a build up resentment because, oh my God, I can't believe they don't know, they don't get it. They don't get it. What else am I supposed to say? And I can't even fathom saying it directly because I actually personally don't like direct people, for example. Right. So then I don't want to be direct. I don't like the people that I know direct. I don't like the way they say it, but that doesn't mean you can't make a specific request in a way that isn't like them. And you can just say it in your authentic voice. That's the whole point of us about putting the authentic voice part of it. And then another part of it, it decreases the productivity because, again, it's like you were saying, people are spending time to decode what you mean, and then they're always going to fall short. So that's why I think it's really important that we do move requests from the hidden to the open.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, my life would certainly be so much
Easier.
easier. Yeah, because Karen, what you said, like this decoding hints it's so hard for me to explain as someone who doesn't have the software for that, to have that awareness that you are actually asking someone else to do the cognitive load. When you make these sort of indirect hints, relying on the other person to make an inference, to make assumptions, to figure out what it is that you actually want and to execute it, you're putting all that cognitive load on the other person. And that can be really, if you can just think about that in a marriage or in a relationship, I can tell you, one side is going to be exhausted from that and probably start showing avoidant behaviors because they're like, it's landmines. It'll feel like there's always landmines. It'll feel like I'm walking on eggshells because of that disappointment you mentioned and that resentment that builds up. So the person who's been trying to decode, all they know is, man, it just seems like no matter what I do, it's wrong. And what they don't realize is they've gotten hooked into this dynamic of this expectation of unconsciously trying to do this decoding, but they're just not getting it right. And now their partner's full of like hurt and resentment, but they're not communicating why, because they're not giving that request that's in the hidden and bringing it into the open and allowing the partner to be successful in meeting the need. Because whatever fear of rejection or fear of developing a conflict, it's really quite exhausting in relationship. By the time a couple comes to me, they're pretty exhausted, and then I have to try to help them find that energy to put into what needs to happen to get better at communication. This is why these podcasts are so important to me, because I'm hoping that people will get some insights and skills before you get to that state of exhaustion.
Yeah, exactly.
And can start making these
Exactly.
changes.
One thing that you did say to me with when you do the couple therapy, what really hit me was when you said, I can't read your mind.
Mm-hmm.
You need to tell me. And we want people to read our mind, but there's just no way. I mean, there's proof that we can't read each other's minds. And so the point of it is we just have to make the assumption that no one will read your mind. And because of that, I've been using that because that creates very simple about why people have to be more direct in the request. I'm telling you, since you taught me those words, it's helping me a lot with coaching my clients.
Well, for those of you who find yourself on the end of the relationship where you feel like you're the one who's doing all of the decoding, let me remind you of this if you've seen our other podcasts. There is a problem in learning that is about intermittent reinforcement. And that, think about a slot machine. A slot machine is an intermittent reinforcement. You don't win every time, but you win enough times that it keeps you hooked into pulling the lever.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
if you are on the decoding side and you get it right enough, it unconsciously rewards the indirect requester to keep doing more indirect requests. So this is where you have to decide if you are getting to that point of exhaustion. This becomes an issue of boundaries. So your boundary will be, I'm happy to consider and respond to direct requests. That's that I can work with that. That's what I need from you, is I need a direct request, because there has to be some awareness that's brought in. And there was something you said earlier, Karen, about, well, I see directness as rude. When I experience people being direct, I think you said this, right? Then it feels rude. So then I don't like doing it. But here's another place where boundaries plays in. I find that people who have not worked on mastering boundaries are the most averse to direct people. When you don't
That's
have
true.
the best, right? If you don't have boundaries, if something comes direct, then it requires you to have boundaries that you can then enforce and say, no, that's not okay for me, or that is okay for me. If you haven't worked on those boundaries and someone's direct, then you feel bullied. You feel imposed upon.
Yes.
So if people are indirect, it gives the person with poor boundaries like this way to kind of slip to the side and just be like, oh, I didn't realize that's what you wanted. Like, I don't have to directly confront it with my own boundaries. I can kind of just pretend like, oh, I didn't know that's what you wanted. Well, maybe. And then you come back with more indirectness, and it's this indirect dance. So in terms of this, starting to look at, why is this hidden? What are the things that sustain keeping reasonable requests hidden and using these sideways hint giving? I think doing some reflection on, am I comfortable with boundaries? Like, do I experience directness as a negative thing? And is it because I don't feel comfortable with boundaries? Having boundaries instantly feels like conflict to me instead of just being in my integrity. Because that might be what is reinforcing, sustaining this kind of behavior without reflection. Again, we're not saying that there isn't place for diplomacy, but it's just to stop and reflect. Is this indirectness serving in that it's keeping, it really is keeping harmony, or it is being diplomatic, or is it actually contributing to conflict in my team or in my relationship? Because then we have to stop and look at, how do we start making some changes to move to more direct communication?
And I love that you tied it back to boundaries. So we're going to put that in the links below too, because that's a really, really big thing and helping to ensure that you're communicating better is about the boundaries. And again, remember, boundaries not like a solid, like, if you don't do this, then da da da, right? It's just sharing where it is, where you are, that makes you become fully you.
And that you can negotiate from. Karen,
Mm-hmm.
you bring up a lot. It's like, hey, it's a starting point. I can't do
Yes.
this, but here's what I'd be willing to do. And
Yep.
that's all in the open. That's when we're bringing a lot more into the open instead of hidden.
So, how can we move into direct communications? What are some of the advice that you give to your clients?
Yeah, it starts with awareness. And I think what Karen said about if you notice that you yourself have a discomfort around directness, that's a good place to start. Am I tending to have a habit of indirectness because I haven't worked on boundaries? So I would do some reflection on that. Then, if you decide, yeah, I found a lot of places where I am having requests that I am hinting at instead of being
Mm-hmm.
direct,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
start with really low stakes. Maybe it's something like taking out the trash. Like you, instead of saying, wow, I cooked dinner and made lunch for the kids and I worked all day and isn't it trash day? But still not saying, hey, can you take out the trash for me? So start with something really low stakes and
Exactly.
just practice making clear, direct requests. You can even tell your partner, hey, I'm about to do something I feel a little uncomfortable about, but would you mind taking the trash out? Your partner's going to be like, okay, and not even realize that that was something weird for you. But you can explain, like, wow, that was really hard for me. I normally feel uncomfortable being direct. It might lead to this really positive conversation about appreciation. Oh man, I love it when you just tell me that was something important to you.
And also, when you do that, if I share that was really uncomfortable, then it gives
Hmm.
them the permissions to say, what do you want me to really do? Because it could help you get into that new habit. Because now you've kind of said, that was really uncomfortable for me. Right. And then
Yeah,
they'd say, oh, it's uncomfortable for you. So I think that's like helping, coaching them on how they can help you be more direct as well.
absolutely. It's inviting empathy.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
instead of going in this dynamic of frustration and feeling that there's eggshells, now you're being vulnerable. So again,
Yep.
you're bringing another hidden into the open, which is the fear around making direct requests and that it's hard. I feel uncomfortable. I get scared. And you're inviting that support and empathy. So it's helpful for that person. It's an opportunity to show you love. Another thing Karen had already mentioned, which is having a positive reframe. So remembering that clear communication is a form of
Mm.
respect of the other person's free choice, respect of their boundaries. Because think about it, if you are going sideways and dropping hints and trying to get what you want without having to actually ask for what you want, there can sometimes be a manipulative
Mm.
aspect of it. Like if you
Yes.
say, use
Yes.
use
Yeah, you're right.
criticism, if you use criticism instead of using a direct request, so that example of, I want my partner to spend more time with their family, but you say, use a critical comment like, oh, so I guess you're going to hang with your best friend again, or you're going to go play golf for 4 hours again. It's an observation, but there's a tone of criticism. It's meant to
Yeah,
evoke
definitely.
guilt. It's
Yeah.
meant to evoke
Yeah.
guilt, and it's using emotional manipulation to get them to read your mind and infer that you're not happy, you want something else, not address what it is, but just do the thing. That's all manipulation. That's not respectful. So if you want to reframe and say, I want in my relationships or my business partnerships is founded on respect, you have to stop and say, gosh, how many times am I using these hints and these sideways communication to get what I want from the other person instead of just respecting that they have free will and they may have their own thing they need to bring to the table, and I can negotiate with that person openly and honestly. So one of our favorite thought leaders, Brene Brown, we mention her a lot. She has this mantra: clear is kind, unclear is
Mm.
unkind.
Yes.
So that could be a reframe. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Third, create safety for direct communication in your relationships. That's what Karen was just observing. Like, yeah, if you share, this is really hard for me. I want to do this more. Can we create a process where I practice being more direct and you are aware so that you can be ready to be more receptive and we can have these conversations? Like, set yourself up to create that safety that you need. If fear is what's causing you to hint instead of being direct, and then use clarity checks. So if you're unsure about an indirect communication, for example, say you have that feeling of you might be walking on eggshells and your radar is going off like, oh, I think there's an indirect. I think I heard a hint. Instead of doing that jumping up the ladder and trying to guess what the person wants, just go back down to any observable data and then ask a clarifying question. Are you requesting XYZ? Is that where you're going with this? And if you're right, just say, I would really appreciate it if it's okay for you to just ask that directly. That would be so much easier for me. So you're both creating the safety, you're doing the clarity check instead of being in the habit of jumping up and trying to guess and trying to decipher and then being resentful that you're using all of this cognitive energy to try to figure all this muckiness figure it out.
Yeah. And so, in closing, I think I really love this because, again, I just think it's a dynamic that a lot of us do that to avoid the conflict. I think that's what I love about why we chose to do this. And so, as we wrap up the episode, remember what she said earlier out, just pay attention to your own communication pattern. Just noticing is where you first start. And, just learn to be more direct, right? And then what's cool about it, you'd be direct with your request and the other person be more direct with their offer. And you just keep going back and forth until you negotiate what's going to be. And what's great about it, set the expectations. And remember, effective communication isn't about being demanding. It's actually about being clear, respectful, and direct for both yourself and others.
Yeah. And as always, we hope that this episode was helpful in creating insight into your own patterns or maybe patterns in your partner or in your teams or at your workplace. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Are you a hint dropper? Why do you think you tend to drop hints? And how can this be helpful to you? And do you keep your requests hidden? And do you think you know why? Is it cultural? Is it anxiety? Just I think it would help in the community if we were all sharing. And what you'll find is this is really, really common. You're not alone. So we hope to see you next week. It will be a year since Karen and I started because it'll be our 52nd episode.
Wow.
So looking forward to seeing everybody then. And until then, just remember, stay curious, stay kind, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.